What is up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Hands Athletics Radio. Today we have probably one of our most notable guests, that is Matt Zanis. So he's going to hop on here. We are going to talk about some principles with the foot and the hip and movement that might not exactly line up with what you've learned before or how you've been taught in the past. So he put out an interesting post, and it kind of sparked our interest to talk to him about movement, as he is a doctor of physical therapy and also works with some of the USA Olympic teams. So we're going to have him introduce himself, go over that. But this episode should be eye-opening for coaches and start a conversation for clients and those that work with their coaches to be able to ask questions and further understand how to improve their movement and not just do a movement because they're asked to do it. So I hope you enjoy, guys, and we'll get him on here shortly. How is Arizona right now?
Dude, it's I say this because I'm just slightly irritated because you know me, I'm a research guy. I follow the numbers. I also follow where the money's going to. So I kind of got a pulse on exactly what's going on. But I'm just waiting for Arizona to get their heads out of their asses with their decision-making skills, because they shut down the gyms for 4 weeks a second time to try and slow this thing.
Oh, a second time.
Second time. So we were shut down for 4 weeks. The numbers never changed, and they still decided to close them down for another 2 weeks moving forward. I'm like, where are you getting all this information from, and why are you making these decisions? You still have large fucking things like Target and Home Depot and Walmart. All these places are still open, massive seas of people. And believe me, I just bought a house, so I've been in Home Depot more times in my life in the past few weeks than I ever have. Yeah. And there's like seas of people in there, most of them not even wearing a mask, that are still mandated here anyway. Like, we're worried about the gyms, especially like the CrossFit gyms that have been doing a great job around here, having like 10 to 15 people in at a time at most, and everybody social distance, not to mention the big global gyms too doing a great job at it as well, because I've been training people in different scenarios, and I'm like, there's no rhyme or reason for the arbitrary decisions that are being made right now. We're just like, we're gonna just do this to make it look like we're actually doing something. And
unfortunately, it seems like it's mostly affecting like the smaller business owners.
Dude, 70% of small businesses are not going to open back up here. That's crazy. What they're projecting right now. It's absolutely ridiculous, and it's amazing. Like, we still have no clue how the immune system works. Clearly, like, you're shutting down the things that actually keep people healthier. So instead of worrying about these masks and trying to wait for a vaccine to come out, like, let's talk about eating healthy. Let's talk about moving more. Let's talk about sleeping better. Like, all these things are totally doable.
But that'd be too easy, dude. Like,
way too easy. Way too easy. No, nobody wants to take responsibility for that shit. Just give me the drug and let them tell me to wear a mask. It's great.
Yeah, I've been telling people. I try to like stay somewhat partial on things, but I've been saying like, all I know is if this dies down in mainstream media after the election in November, I'm going to be furious, because who knows? I don't want to think that there's like all these powers behind it just keeping it going to try to sway that. But, if it does, I'm going to keep an eye on that, and I will be pretty upset if it just it kind of just stops getting talked about. You know
what? I use the same line that Derek Woodsky uses all the time, is that, like, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I'm also not a fucking idiot. Like, it's like, let's not take everything for face value and just listen to what we're being told on the media. Like, I've been told I'm uneducated with all this because of the, my stance on everything going on. I'm like, really? Like, I'm probably one of the most educated motherfuckers out there. I'm just looking at things deeper and asking the questions of why.
Yeah.
Like, why are we making decisions? What is the data actually telling us? Oh, we have inconsistent data. Oh, they're lying to us about the data. So we don't really have any type of foundation to make a logical decision off of.
Yeah, 100%. And even here, it's like I do marketing for a physical therapy clinic. So I'm with doctors doing lunches, talking to them. And they're like, yeah, there's some corruption because they offered money based on COVID-related cases. And there's like, basically the hospitals are making money when they diagnose someone dead or whatever, or on a respirator because of corona. So there's like actual financial benefits.
You've incentivized it.
Yeah, to smudging the numbers per se. So I don't know, man.
Dude, it'll all come out in the wash eventually. But here's the thing: we're never gonna really know the truth behind it all.
No, probably not. We'll just be mad about it and have our ideas, but they'll keep it buried.
Yeah, we're changing our new sense of normalcy. That's for damn sure.
Yeah, cool. Well, let's jump right into it. So let's have you introduce yourself, kind of your background, your experience. A lot of my listeners, there's quite a bit here in Pocatello, probably haven't quite, heard about who you are and what you do. And you're probably one of our or one of my more notable guests that have accomplished things and have education and whatnot. So dive in more about you, and then let's talk about the Instagram post and then movement.
Oh, the elephant in the room, huh? Okay. Yeah. So I appreciate the introduction for sure. Yeah, you're too nice with calling me educated, I guess. I appreciate that. But I'm actually here in Arizona, but I originally grew up in the backwoods of Northeast Pennsylvania. So a little town called Pottsville, about 2 hours north of Philadelphia. And it was really like a blue collar type of an area where your trajectory in life was really dictated by, we say this all the time, geography, opportunity, and genetics, right? So those three different things. And from a genetic standpoint, I grew up in a very predominant baseball family, but problem was that I wasn't really good at it. And I pushed myself hard from the age of 4 to try and achieve something that I was really mediocre at. But I had that hard work ethic and just kept getting hurt, year after year after year. All these little things keep cropping up. And it wasn't until I found weightlifting in high school. Mind you, this is a time when they thought weightlifting for baseball players was detracting from your athleticism. So I kind of went rogue on my own and started to realize that if you move better and actually created a lot of resistance training around these good movement patterns, that a lot of these old injuries just kind of went away. Like I got stronger and I got healthier. So the little I know then is that's kind of when I started to formulate my own philosophy on physical rehabilitation and strength conditioning. And that's kind of, I took that mindset into my undergrad at the University of Pittsburgh, where I did my degree in athletic training and had the opportunity to work with the Pittsburgh Pirates organization, and then went down to grad school at Duke in North Carolina to get my doctorate. And it was down there that actually afforded me the opportunity to travel all over the country for my clinical rotations, one of them being out here in Arizona with the Arizona Cardinals. Completely fell in love with the area, and immediately upon graduating, packed everything up and did that cross-country road trip to move out here permanently. So I've been out here for about 8 years now. Actually, yeah, going on the 8-year anniversary actually at the end of this month. So it's been one hell of a ride so far, I guess. But for the first couple of years here, I worked in the standard insurance-based clinics and learned to hate them with a passion. I was jumping around from clinic to clinic because the fact of seeing 4 people an hour, I was getting burnt out, and I'm like, I can't provide the quality of care. And I learned real quick that I had a much more entrepreneurial mindset than I thought I had in PT school. I still remember our like one semester of business classes, and they asked everybody to raise their hand and be like, how many of you want to actually own your own practice? And I was like, not me. Actually, one person out of 67 did that, but I wasn't one of them. And it was, and I realized it's like, hey, it wasn't me working in these insurance-based clinics. It was the system. The system was really, really fucking broken. So after 2 years of running through that mess, I jumped ship and just opened up my own practice in the back of a CrossFit gym. I had nothing but a table and my brain. And that's kind of where it all started, where I was able to provide the quality care, seeing people for an hour to an hour and a half at a time, and really dive deep into the movement patterns and teach them and educate them. Because that's what, this whole profession is all about. It's about picking apart movement and being able to educate athletes and our clients on moving better to resolve their pain or to improve their performance or achieve whatever type of goal they want to achieve. And it was years of repetition of that just by happenstance, I do believe that everything happens for a reason, Darren. And about a year and a half into that whole process of starting my practice, I got a call from the United States Olympics Committee to come up and work with those guys. So I've been working with the United States Olympic Summer Sports since 2017 now, and firmly, deeply rooted with the USA shooting team. I love it because I've been shooting archery and, rifles and shotguns and pistols my whole entire life growing up in the backwoods. So it just naturally fit. So I've been traveling around with those guys for the past 3 years. I actually should be in Tokyo right now, but we all know what happened with that. So I have to wait it out a year. But it was actually along that whole entire journey that I was following power athletes stuff as well, and got hooked up with Luke back in like 2016 and started to develop that friendship, and things have kind of evolved from there on as well, being able to go on different trips with them and become one of the block one coaches within the network, and just seeing their no bullshit attitude towards strength and conditioning. I kind of fell in love with that because I'm kind of that go against the grain rogue personality as well, and asking those deeper questions of why, that we kind of had this great relationship over the years and been formulating different things with them as well. So I guess that was like the long and short of it all. That was a lot. I mean, that spanned about a decade of my timeline.
Yeah. No, and that's awesome. So quick question for you, just because again, I'm interested. So when you went into the back, like as you started your own practice, went into the back of the CrossFit gym as you built out. So right now is your clinic, or at that time, was it was just cash based and you just found price points that worked for people that couldn't, you know, in terms of obviously insurance makes it a little bit cheaper for people. But again, we see the same thing at our clinic is we are trying to provide good service and actually spend the time with the patients. But at the end of the day, it's kind of a broke model because it's like, you can't make the money you need to make without getting 4 or 5 people on the table an hour, whatever. Yeah.
And that's the thing, like the whole entire, well, from what my experience with it anyway, and from students that I've been getting as well, the insurance-based model is predicated on a lot of the hands-on Band-Aid fix manual therapies where, you know, we're putting somebody on a table, we're getting the hot pack and the cold pack, or the e-stim and the ultrasound and the massage and the dry needling and the cupping, like all these different things that really don't have a permanent long-term impact on their movement skill or the patterns that are really the root cause or the source of someone's pain or dysfunction. And you really don't have the time either to dive into the conversations with people, to really learn about them and connect with them and build rapport and trust, because excuse me, at the end of the day, it's somebody's trust in me as the provider to help guide them along the way. It's actually going to get them better because they're going to do the work. Like, I ain't fixing them. I tell that to everybody. Like, I'm not going to fix you. You are going to be the one that puts in the effort to fix yourself. I'm just going to be that guy along the way that's kind of keeping with you in the guardrails.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, that's awesome, man. Because I think that's providing I mean, that's kind of at our gym, we're able to do that, right? We're able to dive into movement and approach it more from that aspect. And I think that's kind of a gap in the physical therapy world right now.
Huge gap. And it's like you start talking money too. It's, you know, different cash-based providers will charge different cash-based rates, and mine has certainly evolved over the years as well. But even co-pays right now for insurances are up in like the $60 to $80 range. Like, what are you really getting? So you start doing the math, and like that standard 2 to 3 times a week, you're already paying, you know, let's just say $60 a session. That's what, $180 a week versus somebody you could pay maybe $125, $150 an hour for a cash-based rate and actually get the tools necessary to fix your shit.
Yeah. No, that's true. So I mean, if you look at it like that, it's easier to have that conversation, right? If you can just convince people, hey,
value,
you know, this is
value proposition.
Yeah. So this dives straight into, you know, the reason I reached out to you. Obviously, I would want to have you on here either anyway, but so it's kind of funny because I put out something that like a couple weeks ago that really sparked a lot of people on the internet, and then you put that out, and I was like, oh, this is probably going to dabble in the same area. So talk a little bit about that, the post you put out, and kind of go over the idea of it, since you know, not everybody follows you on Instagram, but it had to do with, you know, foot strength, the way the knee's tracking over the foot, the hip orientation and whatnot, when really a lot of people have been taught the opposite. Whether they came up as a coach, a physical therapist, whatever, they're going to be like, whoa, no, knee out over the foot, like no internal rotation. And let's dive into like what valgus really is and what the misconception is.
Oh man, do we have like 4 hours for a
I know. We'll
try and distill it down to the most salient points, I guess. But I guess just to give people a kind of recap what the post was, it was an instructional video on performing the Bulgarian split squat. And of course, from a clickbait standpoint, I said it was the best way to perform the Bulgarian split squat. And of course, I'm biased in that as well. But I do believe that it is based on a biomechanical standpoint. And we can dive into the questions of biomechanics and pain science if that really means a difference. But I think it does, because I think it correlates well to how our providers are actually being taught in school and through a lot of these different education courses. kind of dovetail into a lot of this talk about knees over toe and collapsing of the arch and foot pronation, and whether or not the knee should be driving out over the midfoot or the first and second toe and whatnot. Because I think we've been taught a lot of dogmatic information over the years, and what essentially drove me from high school on up was this not taking everything for face value type of mindset. I always ask the questions why. So if you look at a lot of the information of that PTs and that coaches are being taught is based off of very old literature. Okay, so it's these dogmatic principles and schools of thought that have been around for decades, like dinosaur thoughts, that have seemed to be just keep perpetuating and infiltrating a lot of these different communities of rehabilitation and strength and conditioning. And a lot of it is surrounding the knee. A lot of it from old biomechanical literature, where we were told that if the knee goes below 90 degrees, you're going to fucking blow your patella out and shoot it across the room. Like, we know that doesn't happen now. We know that you're not going to get knee pain if the knee goes out over the toes. It's actually not allowing it to go out over the toes. It's actually causing the knee pain in the long term, because you're never loading the tissues up. And then all of a sudden you go into a position, you can't handle it. Brain elicits a pain response because you've overstressed the tissues and doesn't like what's going on right now because it can't control it. So there's a lot of multifactorial things going on, and just to keep things kind of clear and concise for us, we're not going to go, I don't think we should go into a lot of the the biopsychosocial model thing of fear, avoidance, and movement and all that. Yeah, because that can make things a little bit hairy. But I think that we've not taken biomechanics into consideration, or we've been looking at them from the wrong lens, looking at them through the wrong lens. Because a lot of the biomechanical literature that we have is on cadavers, right? Dead people.
Yeah.
Right? Where we will try and stimulate a muscle to contract to move joints. But when you look at the human body and how it's moving, there's two things wrong with that scenario of how those studies are designed. The first one being a lot of it is done in the open chain. So open chain meaning if we have your foot laying on a table, you're laying on your back, foot's hanging off the table, we ask you to bring your toes up to your shin or point your toes down to the ground. That's an open chain movement of plantar flexion, point the toes down, or dorsiflexion, lifting the toes up, versus now having you on your feet. We ask you to push your knees out over your toes. That is a dorsiflexion moment in the closed connect chain happening at the foot and the ankle. And then standing straight up, let's say out of a squat, that is a plantar flexion action occurring at the ankle. And what's occurring with the biomechanics are two different things than in the open chain.
Yeah.
Okay? So we actually have a lot of literature that actually shows that if you stimulate a muscle to contract, you're not always going to get the joint action. That's commonly thought of, right? So that's already contradictory in nature. Versus if you are in a closed connect chain, if you put the joints into a specific position, we know that you're going to make the muscles perform a specific action of contraction. And that's kind of where this whole biomechanical school of thought is now moving. It's like, well, what is happening when the body is actually in motion, when the foot hits the ground with gait and walking or squatting or lunging? Like, those things really do matter more than what we're looking at on a table. And that was kind of the whole point that I was trying to make with this post, is like a lot of stuff that we've been taught over the years is not necessarily wrong, but we're looking at it the wrong way. And there's two different sides to the coin, right? We could have this very conventional side of the coin where we dive deep into the literature and we try to extrapolate the data into what we believe to be true from a movement standpoint. But then, man, you're a coach, you're in the trenches all day long. You're looking at movement on a daily basis. And sometimes what you see and what you implement is different and goes against the grain of what you typically see in the literature or what you're being taught. So can we actually discount all that? I don't believe that we can. I think we need to take both into consideration and be able to consider both sides of the coin.
Yeah, and 100%. And it's also, at the end of the day, people want to just make everything fit into one whole, right? So it's like there's one answer for this person, like for everyone at my gym, is this is the way they need to move, right? So a good example, and what kind of made me want to dive deeper into this and listen to you talk about it, is like, so I'm on the side of, I always grew up, I'm naturally very bow-legged. I want to be on the outside of my feet all the time. Like, for me to keep, like, actually activate my big toe, grab the ground, I have to feel like in my hips I am internally rotating, like actually using muscle to internally rotate. So in my training, I've been with my movements. I've been doing Field Strong, and I've been kind of after I saw that post like this last week, I've been even more so trying to get over the inside of my foot, and it actually feels great for me. So, and it's a position that, you know, maybe if I was here in the clinic and I demonstrated it, everyone in it would be in agreement that, you know, that's a valgus movement, or that's a risk to your ACL, or, you know, whatnot. And at no point do I feel weak in that position. Does that make sense?
100%.
So that's kind of why I wanted to like dive further into this. And also, obviously, I've coached at a lot of different places coming up before I started my own. And I just want coaches, because I have some coaches that listen to this that can maybe gather a little bit more insight in terms of like knees out, external rotation is not always the correct answer. And if anything, it can actually be adding to a problem. Right.
Could be exacerbating the problem as well.
Yeah.
So to have a conversation about the knee, we actually have to have a conversation of focus on what's going on at the foot and the ankle, because that's what's driving what the knee and the hip are doing. Okay. Because the knee is kind of like the ugly middle stepchild of the lower body. It gets blamed for a lot of things. It's where a lot of the fires come up as far as pain is concerned, or we have talking about torn ACLs or patellar tendonitis or meniscal injuries. And it's never really the source of the problem. Okay?
Yeah.
So when we talk about the foot and ankle, we really only have two things to consider. We can make this real simple, Darren. We either talk about pronation or we talk about supination. Two things that are the only two movement patterns that are occurring at the foot. And that lies into another dogmatic piece of information we've been taught, is that pronation is bad. So we try to block it, we try to isolate it, but you actually need it. You desperately need it, because the two go together. You can't have one without the other. Okay?
Yeah.
So blocking it with things like an orthotic or teaching you to drive the knees out is all trying to focus on this supination aspect of the foot. But that only gives you one option to work with when it comes to movement. It gives you one end of the spectrum. So you're leaving 50% of the other movement possibilities off the table, right?
Yeah.
So it's like a pendulum swinging back and forth. If you are swinging in this one little itty bitty range of just constantly supinating and trying to extend and externally rotate and abduct the hip, you're leaving a lot on the table, because you're not being able to access other end of the spectrum and allow that pendulum to swing a larger breadth of distance, right? So it'll give you more options to be able to work with. So we have a misconception of what's going on with pronation and supination. So if you could see my hand, I don't know if people listening can kind of understand this. If I'm pointing my hand at you, if my fingertips dive in, that's usually called a supinated or pronated foot. So my thumb and my pointer finger are diving down towards the ground, and that would then lead you to believe that the fifth metatarsal, that pinky toe, is lifting up off the floor. Versus supinating, now we're rolling towards the pinky side of the foot, and the big toe is lifting up off the floor. But it's not that simple, right? There's a three-dimensional pattern that's going on down there. That is only one component of pronation and supination. Okay, that's called inversion and eversion, which is where I think a lot of podiatrists are kind of getting this wrong. So the best way to envision pronation and supination is actually like an octopus or a squid. So if you ever look at an octopus or a squid swimming through the water, you see the tentacles go out, and then it'll come together to propel that octopus or that squid forward. Okay, same thing is happening with your foot on the ground. If your toes and your midfoot and your forefoot, they flatten out and they create distance from your heel, that's a pronation. Those tentacles are suction cupping to the floor. Versus supination, where those tentacles are coming up off the floor and the foot is doming. That is a supination action, but the key is that you still have 3 points of contact. You still have your first met head, the big toe knuckle, the fifth met head toe, the fifth toe knuckle, and then also the heel. All right, we need all three of those to have good pronation and supination. But we bring into something like this knees out cue, or to try to keep something over the first and second toe, you're not allowing for that necessary pronation to happen. The pronation, that foot flattening, is necessary to put your supinators and your hip extensors and your knee extensors into a position to contract efficiently and to be able to produce the most amount of power. Without it, we're trying to contract from what's called a mid-range, so from a centered point. We need to be able to go through an excursion of lengthening and then contraction. lengthening, and then contraction. Because that's how movement works. So like when you take a step, your heel hits the ground, your hamstrings are lengthening. When you bring weight over the midfoot and you start to propel yourself forward, they've been put into a lengthened position to be able to contract and pull yourself into the next step. But then guess what? Your hip flexors are now lengthened in the hip extension component, and they're now lengthened enough to contract to pull you into the next step. This is how the body works. So trying to keep it rigid over one specific area of the foot is not allowing for that natural tendency to happen with the muscles in the joints. And what happens is we start driving forces into different structures, different areas of the knee and the hip and the pelvis, and we start wearing away at the stress load tolerance of these tissues, so that our brain has no option but to send out some of these signals, say, hey, we've had enough here. And this is where a lot of these things start to occur with knee pain and hip pain and back pain.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. So again, that brings up a good point. Like the tripod foot, that's something that people hear about. That, so obviously that's a good thing. So tripod, that's something you need to be looking for, talking about, and then within that stipulation of that full foot on the floor, then we can start talking about pronating and supinating within
exactly
with those points on the floor, right? Yeah. So
and valgus at the knee. Sorry, because I know this was part of the original question too. Valgus at the knee isn't a bad thing. It's necessary. So when the foot pronates, the knee is going to come in, and it's going to come in out over that first ray, the first big toe, or slightly inside of it. That is okay. That's not going to blow an ACL. Now, if you lose that fifth med head and the foot comes up and you start really, really rolling onto the inside edge of that foot, yeah, you lost contact. Now that knee can fall way inside. And that's where we start to run into some problems with some ACL tears.
Gotcha.
Okay, versus having the good stability through the foot.
And real quick. And I would say like we've grown so much in high school, like 12 to 17-year-old athletes. And I would say one of the most common problems, because we are kind of switched on enough to look for this, is, people come in all the time with pain at that age and you're like, okay, something's up. And a majority of the time is like ankle range of motion and feet are super weak. Like it's very, very common with the youth. Like, I don't know if they're not playing as much. They've got shoes on all the time, whatever it is. Like, I don't remember having a lot of pain when I was that age or having that issue. Maybe it's also because they're playing like 100 more games a season than I played when I was growing up. But that's a very common fault and flaw. And even with our older clientele, like that's one of the first things we work on shoring up is doing some active foot stuff, strengthening the feet and whatnot. So you're right. Like when you say that people blame the knee or even the hip, but they never think to look down at the feet. So
well, you may not have had pain, but I sure as hell did as a kid.
Yeah, I didn't.
When I played baseball as a catcher, so I was in cleats my entire life, and I never squatted with my heels on the ground. Yeah. So when I got done with my baseball career and decided to try and find, regular squats, I was like, what is this thing? Squat with your heels on the ground. I've never done this before. But my feet were freaking terrible, dude. I was like walking like a penguin. I was waddling. My feet were collapsed in. I essentially had flippers for feet. And I had terrible foot pain, Achilles tendon issues, knee issues. And it wasn't until I got to PT school and started correcting those things that a lot of these issues just went away. And I actually took my shoe size from a size 12 and a half to a 10 and a half over a 3-year time span.
Wow.
Because I learned how to strengthen up my foot, and you can get that donor effect. It just takes effort and takes some time to be able to do so, but it can happen.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. So those post was about the split squat or Bulgarian split squat. Obviously this carries over to bilateral movement and
sure does.
Typical lunging, right? So coaches that are listening, when we're talking about these concepts, it's movement, not movements, right? Like Power Athlete says, we're not just talking about Bulgarian split squats. We're talking about this is going to carry over to everything you do and whatnot. So we just got, you can see it in the background of the picture here, but we just got like a true form treadmill, which has been awesome because we'll get kids running on it barefoot. We can give them that feedback, talk about, this is why we lunge the way we do. This is why we step up the way we do, because this treadmill makes you run in the exact ways that we are teaching you to do this. And, so it's been a huge tie together for, the idea beyond just there's movements that are right, or a certain cue that's right, to like, let's look at movement as a whole and as a remedy and as a medicine, instead of arguing about which one's better, right?
Yeah, I think we could spend a lot less time arguing on that if we did a little bit more time understanding movement and what it exactly is occurring, right? And watching it more, because we can make this really simple, Darren. Like, anytime the knee is at a flexion moment, so when your knee is bending and the knee is going out over the toes, your foot should be pronating. We should be allowing that arch to come down to the ground, because that will allow for the femur to internally rotate. It'll actually allow for the pelvis to anteriorly tilt to get more flexion out of the hip. And what's going to happen is you're going to put those big, powerful glute muscles, and not to mention your adductors and your hamstrings, all into a great position to contract. Okay, if we don't, you can think about it this way. If you're, so like, let's just try and say that we're trying to keep that knee over the middle of the foot. We know that's a pretty stable position for the knee to be in, but it is actually not really very common to get into it. But if you're trying to keep that knee out over the toe, over the first and second toe, or the middle of the foot, and cueing somebody to drive their knees out, what you're doing is essentially trying to drive your car forward with the parking brake on. And you're essentially just going to start wearing away at these brakes, because your body, it knows how to move. We just get in the way. And what happens is we're not allowing for those natural patterns to occur. Like, just let them occur, and then you set up everything into a beautiful position to contract, to create the rotation in the hip, to be able to drive into hip extension, to have that powerful propulsion forward. And if we take this into something like a bilateral squat, like, you're still allowing both feet to pronate, femur is still going to internally rotate, the knees aren't going to go knocking together, they're going to slightly come in over the toe, but you're going to allow the hip to flex. If we're constantly trying to drive out into external rotation, we're going to reach a point where we can't flex anymore. And this is where you typically see people stopping at like 90 degrees. I can't tell you how many times I've had like young kids in high school, I'll ask them to squat and they stop at 90 degrees. I'm like, really? Can you go anymore? And all of a sudden I give them permission to go further, and they can squat down beautifully.
Yeah.
That's because they've been having this trained into them over the years already.
Yeah.
Versus now we can't flex anymore. We either get stuck at 90 degrees, or that motion is going to come from someplace else. And that's going to be from the pelvis and the spine. This is where you're going to get your rotation. You're going to get the spinal flexion, that like pooping dog, like shit and razor blades type of emotion, where you wholesale tuck everything under. Because your brain's not stupid. It's going to want you to get into those positions that you're trying to get it into, despite your best efforts to try and prevent you from letting it naturally happen.
Yeah, great point. So for coaches listening, it's like, a question they might have is, okay, so we're going to consider letting our athletes have like what we would used to deem a valgus movement in the knee. So a thing to focus on, what I'm gathering, is check those feet. So get them barefoot so you can see their feet working, and let them work within those ranges, with that thought that that tripod foot, or that connection of the foot on the floor, is maintained.
Correct.
Is that a good way to look at it?
100%. Like, give them the freedom to explore the movement. Like, they're not going to blow out an ACL, especially in training. Like, we're loading them up in a very safe environment. You got good coaches surrounding you. You're keeping a good eye on them. Like, it's not going to be detrimental. And just having the mindset where that isn't bad is going to be able to lessen the amount of fear associated with it. When we start fearing movement, that's when we start to get all these hesitations. And what are we looking for with athleticism there? And the seamless and effortless movement.
Yep.
It's no longer becomes seamless and effortless if you don't allow the body to naturally let it occur.
Yeah, not when you give it all these stipulations that
you get that paralysis by analysis with it.
Yeah. So where can people, let's say they don't have the option of going back to school right now, or they don't want to, where can people find good information on kind of movement and biomechanics? Are there resources that are a little more readily available?
Yeah. So I'm actually creating an educational series right now to start to educate coaches, and we're doing this in conjunction with Power Athlete as well. So all the coaches within our network are going to be the ones that are going to be able to benefit from this first. So being able to get coaches on board with understanding movement, like you said, not movements, and to get a better understanding of these biomechanical factors that do really have a role to play in how well our athletes are moving and continue to battle the bullshit when it comes to a lot of the information that's being thrown out there. But there are a lot of great books and resources out there as well. Gary Ward is a guy out of Great Britain that has some great information. You can look him up on Instagram. He's been a great influence on me over the past few years as well. There's Katie Bowman. She's got a book called Move Your DNA, which is another really great, insightful book into just general movement. And then let's see here. Todd Hargrove is a physical therapist, and he's got a book called Playing with Movement as well. So those are some great books to go to. Definitely great people to learn from, for sure.
Yeah. Do you have a projected date on kind of when you're going to have your course available for people that are interested?
We don't have a projected date yet. It's still in the filming process as well. So as more information comes out on that, we'll definitely be getting it out there.
Gotcha. Quick question for you. Do you within the physical therapy realm, do you get quite a bit of backlash based on kind of the stuff you're putting out, or are there more therapists that are open to that as time is proceeding?
Yes, there definitely is a lot of backlash. I see that as a good thing, though, because if you're not creating ripples and not making waves, I don't think we're putting out good information, right? So you're not getting people to think and question, which I totally encourage. Yeah, totally. Ask me questions, prove me wrong. Like, we should be taking responsibility for our thoughts and our actions and our decisions around movement. Because if we don't, how are we ever going to push this profession in this coaching realm forward, right? It's just going to stay stuck and stagnant. And you're not. So here's a dichotomy that you're seeing, and I'll probably get shit for saying this too. There are a lot of physical therapists out there trying to teach strength conditioning that don't understand it. And it's unfortunate to say, but like their only reference point for strength conditioning has been CrossFit. And that is one tiny little piece of the puzzle. Like, fitness is not understanding good movement, and simply giving people corrective exercises and progressions or regressions from the Olympic lifts doesn't qualify you as a good movement expert, right? Because if you don't truly understand what's going on, you're just throwing shit up against the wall and seeing what sticks. So that's what we're attempting to do here. Nick, Kyle, and I are kind of collaborating on this together. I know you know him pretty well as well. With Power Athlete, to start putting out this information and being the strength and conditioning professionals that are teaching rehab professionals how to do this right. That's the end game.
Yeah, I think there's a huge gap even with like
huge
doctors or people that kids go into with issues, and there's just certain typical prescriptions they give them without even looking at movement whatsoever. So it's like, how do we include that in the conversation of diagnosis when it comes to, something going on with a kid? Or an example would be, I have a youth athlete that they tried to throw her on orthotics, and she had a lot of swelling in her lower limb. Like, they basically called it compartment syndrome at like 13 years old, yada, yada, yada.
True.
Can't play a soccer game without so much swelling that she can't finish. And they basically just said, hey, you need to wear these in your shoes all the time and take a bunch of ibuprofen. So and I've been working with her for 6 months, maybe. And we're back in soccer season, and thus far, no pain. And all we did was really work on horrible foot strength, as you can imagine, just the weakest feet, really weak hips from just not having weak feet, right? So as you try to play, move, and you have weak feet, everything's going to kind of follow suit. So just worked on shoring that up, nothing special, some active foot stuff, and so far pain-free. She hasn't played as many games because of Corona, but she has been playing, doing the conditioning tests. And, the first thing I said was, take those orthotics out. Don't wear those anymore. So
I love hearing success stories like that.
Yeah, it's crazy, but it's like, it's simple at the end of the day. It's just getting overlooked, and we're just like a Band-Aid culture of, do this. And
so let me ask you then, Darren, do you ever feel like you're on an island sometimes?
Yeah. So here's the funny thing, is you brought up stirring the water, and I kind of felt bad because like a couple weeks ago I put out a thing on my philosophies on training high school athletes and how CrossFit is the way to do it, and I got a ton of backlash.
I missed that one.
Yeah, I got a ton of
Damn, I would have jumped in on that.
Yeah, I got a ton of backlash, and people in my community were pretty upset. And at the end of the day, I started to almost feel like bad. I was like, man, I kind of feel bad that these people feel like I'm attacking their livelihood or what they believe. But I'm like, at the end of the day, I just want to have a conversation. Like I'm open. Like if you can convince me it's a good way because of the way you do it, sure. But let's talk about it. Let's open it up. And so
Well,
I
like,
almost
dude,
feel bad for stirring it.
I don't think you should. Like, I'll be the one to give you validation for you're doing the right thing, because sometimes I seek that same level of validation. Because I'm like, am I just being an asshole?
Yeah,
Like,
I was like,
am I
man,
just
I feel
pissing
like a
people
dick.
off? Like,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, we're just trying to, like, this is completely not selfish in any ways. Like, we're just on the same team. We're trying to drive this profession forward, and we're trying to help young athletes be better and not have such a high rate of pain and injury and disability that we're still continuing to see. So if we were doing things right, if we really were great at reducing the risk for injury, why would ACL still be on the rise? Why would the incidence of shoulder pain still be on the rise in gyms? Like, these are very common issues that we see that we haven't even put a dent into it because we keep putting Band-Aids on shit. Instead of having the wherewithal and the knowledge to start to fix this shit. I'm right there with you, brother. I am. Believe me.
Whew, yeah, I just starting to feel bad. So it's good to hear that it's not me just being because I did it. I think there's a way you could be a dick about it, but I did it in I'm open to. I'm not putting things out there to not listen.
No. And that's the thing. Like, we all have great intentions, right? And I firmly try to believe and give people the benefit of the doubt that everybody's going out there with the best intentions for the people that they're working with. But we're making decisions based on the information that we know at the time. Okay, so you can't fault somebody for that, but benign ignorance and neglect it's not a solution, and it doesn't give you the right to not try and continue to find better ways to do something.
I agree. So where can people connect with you? They're interested in this conversation. You put out a ton of great information on movement.
Thank you for that. Yeah, so you can find me at Rooted in Movement on Instagram, and movement is an acronym, so it's all the vowels are out of there. It's just MVMNT, and that stands for Movement, Vitality, Mindset, Nutrition, and Training. And then you can also find my beautiful new website that just got built out, rootedinmovement.com. Same thing with the acronym at the end.
Cool. I'll put all that in the show notes too for those listening. Yeah, man. So thanks for hopping on. I appreciate you having you and finally having a highly educated guest on the podcast other than just my buddies. So.